in a scenario where Mexico declares war on the United States. Let's get into it. So, a key factor into this is that Mexico declares war on the United States, not the United States declares war on Mexico. If the scenario were to look something like this, then it would be totally different. Try to guess what it would be like. Yep, that's super simple. But because it's like this, it's gonna be very different. Let's get into it. So Mexico is gonna all of a sudden declare war on the United States. Yeah. So Mexican troops will be going up and starting the invasion of the Texan area, as they will be being very successful tearing down the border wall, and they're pushing towards the Houston area. They will also be successful in the Arizona area, where there's not very much protection. But the LA area is where there's a lot of the protection, and the Mexicans are able to greatly push back and take over the entire state of Arizona. And then they start a huge pushback to attempt encircle Texas. If they can get California and Texas, Mexico might actually have a chance of winning this war. And immediately Mexico is going to attempt and slither their way through the Houston area in attempting to take it. They get to about here before they're stopped. I'm pretty sure Houston is right about here, I think. Yeah. And also the Mexicans have had some time to prepare for this. They've been preparing for a while, specifically when it comes to the Navy. We're adding a new layer to this. The naval layer. Yeah, that's interesting. Mexican navies will be mainly focusing on, the Gulf of Mexico or America, depending on what you support. I personally support Gulf of Mexico. I just feel like it's better. And also, this Navy layer is going to be really good into helping scenarios be more interesting. But the Mexican Navy is going to be able to push out the U.S. Navy for reasons that you can make up and interpret. Maybe having to do a little bit something about this over here. Maybe even a little bit about this. Yeah, maybe even possibly this thing, and maybe this. You guys can interpret that. But to make this a little bit more interesting, the Mexican Navy, has become one of the stronger navies in the world. Enough to rival the U.S. Navy, as a lot of the U.S. Navy, for reasons, is sending over to Europe and to Asia, which is going to cause not too much in the Gulf of Mexico, which will cause the Mexicans to push back the American Navy a lot in the Gulf of Mexico area. And they will be making a spearhead towards the Floridian area and succeed. And then the American Navy is going to head in and start a great pushback towards this area, and it'll look something like this. When we go back to the front lines, the Mexicans, who may or may not be getting supported by a certain country here, and maybe another certain country, and maybe even another certain country. Oh, Mexico is being supported by Mexico might be being supported by a certain country, another certain country, another certain country, and a couple other certain countries around the world. Yeah. And this success will cause them to push up and take Houston. Definitely the biggest loss for the Mexicans so far. Americans. But the Americans will be having success over in the LA area, because Los Angeles is... Yeah, I definitely like this color palette better, and had some technical difficulties. But the Americans will be able to push through and take this area. And now the Americans are sending their navy into this area. And the Americans will be attempting to add their ships into this area. And they will be doing successfully. Yeah, this is a giant American navy. But the Mexican navy is also going to be going towards this area, as they will be taking these islands here that are now covered by the map. They will be pushing in and taking this giant area. And the Mexicans are starting an operation to capture Hawaii, because if Hawaii is captured, all of this area here is now controlled by Mexico's navy. Yeah, so the Mexicans will start their operation by pushing through and are attempting to make a spearhead to cut off this area. A naval spearhead. Not sure how that will work in real life, but let's just see. The Mexican Navy is also going to be sending the best ships out into the LA area, Los Angeles, and will be able to surround the coast for about 3 hours until they get pushed back greatly, as the American Navy is going to be very successful in taking over a bunch of these areas. And because of this, the American Navy is able to take over all of this area. And guess what? The Mexican Navy is being destroyed by the American Navy. And huge naval landings will be happening in this island, starting from down south. And the troops will be heading up north. And I had a technical difficulty realizing this was on the wrong layer. I've got to remember to switch layers often. And as they go up, they will be also using LA as a spot in the... Yeah. This is not going very well for the Mexicans, as the Mexicans will be kicked out of the Baja Peninsula. And the American Navy is able to take over all this area. But the So yeah, I keep forgetting to switch the layer. Might have some issues, but the American Navy is able to take this area. The Mexican Navy is able to stop this spearhead, as a lot of the American navies are mainly focusing on this giant Hawaii thing here, mainly focusing on this, because the Americans see that as a threat. Meanwhile, the Mexican Navy will be able to take out a bunch of this area, because one of the strongest navies in the world now. I may or may not have left Mexico just a little bit in order to make this video not look like this. Yeah, just to make the video not look like that. Yeah, but the Americans will still have a naval thing here, and the Mexicans will be able to take all this area. The Mexicans in the Houston area, they are out, as Houston is recaptured by the Americans. Oh my, how many times am I going to have to pause in order to do this layer thing? The Arizona pushback is still going very well, as the Americans aren't really too worried about this. Until they may or may not should be, as the Mexicans are sending a majority of their armies up here. Oh, and a lot here as well. Mainly up in the north. And maybe a couple to LA. But the Mexicans are going to be, pushing back greatly as they spearhead for Oregon. And then the Americans realize this is enough. They do not like this. Yeah. And also the Mexicans are failing in LA as, they're kicked out of the area. And then from Texas area, the Americans will be attempting to make a spearhead towards this area to encircle the troops. And, Mexico knows what's happening, so they make all of the troops leave the area, which, greatly stops this, as the Mexican foothold in America turns from this to this within about a month. Yeah. And the Mexican Navy is also able to do this. And the Mexican Navy is finally able to make a landing on the Floridian Peninsula, as they will be taking it after a couple of weeks of fighting. Yeah. And this is going to be enough for the Americans. The Americans are seeing that the war, they're kind of embarrassed by this. You're losing to Mexico. You lost the Gulf of Mexico. You have taken Baja, but you could have been here now. But yeah. So the Americans will be fully kicking Mexico out of Florida and putting a bunch of their navy into the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. As in these fronts, they will send navy fleets throughout all of the coastline. Yeah. As the Americans will be destroying the Mexicans, they're mainly focusing on the Yukon area. As they will be going down and taking this area, they don't know the Mexicans have a strong naval dominance here. But this area is weaker, mainly here. but they were able to take over everything else in that line, and they start to push through the Mexican Navy. As the Americans are finally pushing back the Mexicans, could have been a while. The Americans thought this was going to be an easier war than, well, it's been, but they do land in the Yucatan Peninsula by Navy, and they make a big landing in it. And, yeah, that's something. But the Mexicans will be inviting another country to join this war against the Americans. Try to guess who. Okay, Cuba. That could be a thorn. But at the same time, the Americans are going to get another country on their side. Guatemala. I don't know what else to do. As, this is what the war looks like. And, try to guess what happens in the Guatemala with Guatemala. Guatemala is completely blocked by Navy. And, try to guess what this looks like. Yeah. But with naval help, the Americans will be being kicked out of the Yucatan Peninsula and starting to be pushed back by Cuba. And then the Americans seeing Cuba are even more embarrassed. As, well, they can't fight off two countries to the south. That's kind of embarrassing, especially for you, America. But the Americans will be starting an operation in order to take Cuba out of the war. As their Navy will be going ahead. Oh, wait. Wrong layer again. As the American Navy will be succeeding in taking all of this area, and the Americans make an amphibious landing into Cuba. I'm not even sure if that's the right saying. As they will be, doing this, and will be going ahead, and with the very strong American military, will be able to take the island. And with that, they will also be able to take this island after a huge naval pushback by the Americans. And, basically, Mexico is less likely to win now. And then the Americans will start to send their Navy around here, as they make a giant spearhead through the ocean, which they have no problem making, and will be navally dominating all of this area. Which is not so good for Mexico, as, Mexico was kind of completely surrounded by America's Navy, which is not very good, and just surrounded by America overall. But the Mexican Navy will be failing over in this area, as Americans will be storming this area. And yeah, now Mexico, looks like this. Then the Americans will be re-entering into the Gulf of Mexico. As, they would be able to push through the naval domination in the Gulf of Mexico and push the Mexican Navy back to here. But that's when these ships arrive. And the American Navy will also be able to capture all of this area and start an operation to capture all of this area. Yeah. And the Americans will be continuing their operation, and swiftly they will be kicking the Americans out of this area. The Mexicans will be kicked out of this area as massive landings using this sea thingy here, this thing, this will happen, and the Mexicans will start losing greatly, as all of this area here will be absolutely destroyed by the Americans. And the Americans are winning. Yeah, just as expected. And then the Mexican Navy completely fails. The Mexican Navy abandons itself and will be, just abandoning itself. In many landings that the entirety of this coastline here will be able to be made, as, the Mexicans have completely lost hope. As the Americans will be taking the capital, Mexico, as a country, will be being forced to surrender. Yeah, that was a long war. And maybe you may not have embarrassed the Americans just a little. But let's look at the peace treaty to this war. And this is the peace treaty. Cuba is fully annexed by America, and this Yucatan Peninsula area is also American, and so is all this Mexican area. And Guatemala is released and looks like this, and Mexico is just this. Yeah. And that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's video. See you in the next video, and bye.